Thank you very much, Ed and Governor. Ladies and gentlemen, head table guests, I do want to acknowledge a special friend of mine who's here with us today, and that's a previous Premier of Quebec, Pierre-Marc Johnson. Pierre-Marc Johnson, who's right over here. Predecessor. And I want to thank Noel Latif for the invitation today at the Foreign Policy Association, and acknowledge among our honored guests today, of course, our Consul General here, Dan Sullivan, for Canada here in New York, and our Delegate General, as the Governor was so kind enough to mention, Robert Keating, who's also with us today. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to share this podium for the first time with Governor Patterson. We've heard a great deal about you, Governor, in Quebec. When I met with you this morning for the first time, I wondered whether you had been and traveled to Quebec before, and he just shared with me, I hope you won't mind me sharing this secret. He said he'd been up to Quebec a few years ago, and he remembers it well because there was a famous boxing match at the time, which is all in line with politics. I asked him whether he enjoyed it. He said, in fact, I went to a flower show. And if ever you return to Quebec, don't say that to people. Go to the boxing match is my advice. But he has spoken already about the relationship between Quebec and New York, and I wanted to speak to that and speak also to the future. But I acknowledge and recognize that we're here in exceptional circumstances. I don't know of any time where it would be as interesting being in the city of New York as it is to be here today, at this moment, at this time, in the middle of a financial crisis, as your Governor has pointed out so well, that is affecting the world over. And that is especially true for those of us who live in Quebec, who are your northern neighbors and who are very directly connected to this economy. And I'll speak to that in a second. But we follow with a great deal of interest what's happening here, because it does affect us. And so the decisions your government will be making, the decisions in your leadership, Governor, in addressing this crisis is going to be very important for the people you represent, but also important for your neighbors. And we're also here at a time where there are two federal election campaigns going on simultaneously. And that, I don't think that's ever happened in my lifetime. There's obviously the campaign here in the United States, but there's also a federal campaign back home. And the election will be held on October 14th, and so it's a very intense political period on both sides of the border, with a lot of issues, frankly, that resonate on both sides and have great consequences both for the United States and for Canada. And so this is a very important moment in the history of our respective countries. It would be interesting, in fact, I was listening to your governors, thinking that in 2-3 years from now, it would be interesting to see, after these campaigns have happened, after this crisis has passed and decisions have been made and changes have been made, to see where we are and what direction the world has taken since then. But in the meantime, let's try to get a good sense of what all of this means. And the Governor already spoke of the fact that when I was first elected in 2003, the Canadian dollar was at 69 cents relative to the American currency. The barrel of oil was $30 a barrel of oil in 2003. This was, a little over 5 years ago when I was first elected. And of course, competition from emerging economies was very intense and has become even more so in the last 5 years. In the short period of 5 years, things have changed dramatically. We've seen that here, but also in Quebec and in Canada. Though I should add that our situation is quite different. We are not experiencing the crisis that you are experiencing now in your financial institutions. We did not experience the pike in prices and housing prices that you have, and the subsequent issues relative to loans and all the issues around the subprime. That has not been our experience. In fact, we've had a very different story. In fact, in terms of public finances, our story is also very different. In the last 20 years, our respective governments, the federal and provincial territorial governments, have addressed the issues of deficits. And our governments have balanced budgets all over the country. The federal government of Canada has been running very important surpluses in the last few years. And of course, our trade balance has been positive throughout. which is the case to this day. And that brings me to one fundamental point about Quebec and Canada that we need to reiterate to understand where we are in all of this and where our future lies. We have a small population base of 33 million people in Canada, 7.7 million people in Quebec, yet we have one of the highest standards of living in the world because we trade. We are a trading nation. A very high, close to 50% of our GDP, if you include what we sell to other provinces, is directly related on trade. And by the way, this trade is not only about natural resources. The perception often of Quebec and Canada is that we're a resource-based economy. Of course, resources is a big, big part of our economy, but our economy is one of the most knowledge-based economies in the world. It's the aeronautical industry. We have one of the biggest, the third most important hub of the aeronautical industry in the world is in Montreal. The pharmaceutical industry, biotechs, multimedia, and of course everything that has to do with life sciences. We are going to build in the next few years 2 major super hospitals in Montreal alone. And so our economy over the last few years has progressed tremendously. But we remain very dependent, directly dependent on trade. And that is a key issue for us. That's why we pay attention. If during your election campaign here someone speaks about trade and NAFTA, for example, as was the case, we pipe up and we listen very carefully. In fact, you'll find the Canadian media to be very, very interested, if not obsessed, with the American campaign here because of the impact on our economy. And when we look at our relationship, what we find is an extraordinary relationship, a unique relationship throughout the world, by the way. I know of no other place where there is such a border, where there is such a strong bonds as between Canada and the United States, Quebec and the state of New York. We're neighbors, we're friends, we're business partners, and we also trade together, and our economies are directly linked. And so in that respect, we believe in open trading. We depend on it. Our future depends on our ability to increase this trade. And as we look ahead, we believe that one of the answers that we should all be pursuing is to do whatever we can to increase that relationship. You are, and you're very right, Governor, in pointing to the fact that we live in a global economy. If that's the case, we have to do everything in our power to make it work, to adjust our institutions to this economy that has become global, whether it's financial institutions, banking institutions, or governments. So in that respect, we need to make our borders work efficiently, for example, while dealing with security issues, which are relatively new after the events of 9/11. There's a whole new emphasis on security now that was not there before the events, the sad events of 9/11. We need to deal with new issues like energy. Quebec is a world power in the area of renewable energies. We're the 4th biggest producer of hydroelectricity in the world. We're going to be the biggest producer of wind power in North America with Texas by 2015. And we are producing new forms of energy like cellulosic ethanol, which you are doing and researching here in the state of New York at the University of, in Albany at the University of New York. There's an area where we have a great deal to share in terms of addressing greenhouse gases, new energy requirements, and sharing what we have on this continent. And on the energy side, what's very interesting about our relationship is that we are a friend and a reliable supplier of energy at a time when being a reliable supplier has become a security issue for the future of the United States. So ladies and gentlemen, as we look ahead, here are areas in which we want to work with you. On reducing greenhouse gases, Quebec is committed to meeting the objectives of Kyoto. It's interesting to note, though, that a number of American states and provinces have disagreements with their respective federal governments on this issue, as is the case with Quebec. We're not shy about saying this. We don't agree with the position of our federal government in regards to Kyoto or reducing greenhouse gases. We have announced and put forward our own policy, which is tied to our energy policy, to our transport policy. We're going to meet the objectives of Kyoto. We're going to do it by levying a green tax. We're one of the first jurisdictions in the world to levy a carbon tax, which generates $200 million in revenue a year that we apply to projects that in the area of transport for green technologies. But we are also working with a number of our neighbors in the northeastern United States, for example, with the state of New York, with RGGI, with a regional emissions, greenhouse gas emissions strategy that you've put forward to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for your power plants. We're an observer at that table, and we are working with every partner on this continent to meet those objectives. I want to speak briefly about the future, though, and I want to share with you where we see our future and how, in the next few weeks and months, we're going to cross a number of very important rivers to get to where we think we should be going. In Quebec, our ambition is to create a new economic space for our economy and for the people of Quebec. And to do that, we believe that we need to create an environment where there is more mobility for people to work and to attract workers, qualified workers, to Quebec. In fact, one of the big issues we will be facing is the shortage of workers and specialized workers within our province. In the next few weeks, we'll be hosting the President of France, who will be in Quebec City to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the foundation of Quebec City. We will be signing with him at that time, if all goes well, an agreement on the recognition of professional qualifications, which means this in practice. If you're a doctor in France, you'll be recognized as a doctor in Quebec. If you're an engineer in Quebec, you'll be recognized as an engineer in France. And we are going to go as far as we can in recognizing all types of professions, jobs, so that there is total labor mobility between France and Quebec, whether you're a carpenter or a plumber. And the idea behind this is to create this new space of mobility so that we can attract people, attract qualified workers. If we succeed in doing this, we will be the first place on the planet to put forward such an agreement between two economic blocs. And to do it between France and Quebec for us is very significant for another reason, because we'll do it in French, in a space where people speak French, which for us in Quebec is extremely, extremely important. The second project, which will have an impact on the United States, not tomorrow, not the day after, but in a few years from now, is Canada and the European Union engaging in negotiations to conclude a transatlantic accord. What some would call a free trade agreement, but in fact, it's more than that, a lot more than that. The most ambitious accord between a country like Canada and an economic bloc like the European Union that we've ever seen, that will deal with the issue of labor mobility again, with government procurement, with trade, with tariffs, of course, but also go further for cooperation in the area of education, science, culture, and the environment. Our belief is that if we are successful in launching these negotiations, which will happen again when President Sarkozy will be in Quebec because he's the chair of the European Union, that this could actually set the template of what could be a larger accord and agreement between the European Union and the United States. But that's not for tomorrow, it's not even for next year. This is something that I see, that I believe will happen in 5, in 10 years from now. And when it does, I hope you'll give me credit for it, and remember that I said it here first. The other projects that are within Canada, one is we're signing and negotiating a trade accord with the province of Ontario. There are still barriers between both our provinces. We're going to eliminate those barriers and create a single regional economy. If we're successful at doing that within the next year, it'll be the 4th biggest economy in North America after Texas, California, and the state of New York. We've just concluded among the premiers an agreement for total labor mobility within Canada. And the last project I wanted to just single out to you today that we're working on, and we'll be making further announcements about that, is opening up northern Quebec. Northern Quebec is a great, great landmass. I'm talking about what is over and above the 49th parallel, 72% of our landmass, twice the size of France. This extraordinary territory that has minerals and energy, it has extraordinary resources. And we want to develop northern Quebec so that we can actually do this with our First Nations and the Inuit and have an opportunity to develop these resources while respecting the environment and the principles of sustainable development. But we see there a great, great opportunity for development. By the way, it'll be very interesting to watch all of this happen. In our federal campaign, there's some attention given to our north, something that Americans should pay attention to. There's a small issue called the Northern Passage, right over Quebec, that with global warming will be opening up. Now, the Northern Passage, as I close today, I just want to leave you with one thought. It belongs to Canada. This is our land. It's our waters. The United States government, I regret to say, does not recognize the Northern Passage as being Canadian territory. They recognize it as being international territory. And neither does the European Union. Neither does Russia. Now, there may be some food for thought there. I think if we all had a choice, we'd all prefer that it be Canadian territory, because it is ours. Thank you, Noel.